the last 6 words in our mission, which I'm passionate about, are for the ultimate benefit of society. And really, that's what we're trying to connect finance and investment management to, is a sense of purpose.
Hello, I'm Magali Laguerre-Wilkinson. Welcome to Ethics in Business, in their own words. To celebrate the 5th Annual Global Ethics Day in October 2018, ACCA, the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, has teamed up with Carnegie Council and CFA Institute to produce this interview series. It features global business leaders exploring how businesses are preparing for an ethical future in the face of threats and challenges presented by globalization, technology, and human psychology. Today, we are talking to Paul Smith, President and CEO of CFA Institute. CFA Institute is the global association for investment management professionals with over 150,000 members and 151 local member societies worldwide. Its mission is to lead the investment profession globally by promoting the highest standards of ethics, education, and professional excellence. CFA Institute believes it's vital that those in financial services maintain high ethical principles, which are essential to protecting investors, functioning markets, and growing economies. What role does CFA Institute play in the community?
Well, I guess we have 2 roles. One as an employer, and we have offices from Charlottesville in Virginia, which is our headquarters, through to Beijing in China. And so we obviously have a responsibility, as far as that is concerned, to be a diverse employer, and an employer who thinks about its carbon footprint and the way we impact the environment in and around our offices. But on a wider context, we have something like 163,000 members around the world in 165 countries. And we also have 320,000 candidates as well. So 500,000 people in our ecosystem, if you like, in many, many countries. And our responsibility there is to provide education that helps them be thoughtful citizens of the planet we all inhabit.
So it seems as though the CFA Institute's tentacles are a little bit everywhere. What are some specific philanthropic efforts that CFA Institute is undertaking?
Well, I think the biggest one that we're doing at the moment is around women in investment management. So the impact there, it was a project that was started in India, in fact, in Mumbai, where we've taken 49 young women. Originally it was 50, but one young lady dropped out of the program. 49 young women who didn't have access to financial education and didn't have the aspiration, really, to think that their professional careers could take them into finance. And we put them through something that we rather sort of inelegantly call a boot camp, which is sort of a 4 to 5 week training program. And then working with industry partners, we got each of them a 6-month internship with an asset management company in India, which was also paid. So that was very important. We don't believe in abusing our young people in terms of unpaid internships, and put them through that. And that's been a huge success. And as a result of that, the G7, under Canada's current leadership, have noticed that program and are working with us to fund that in up to 9 other countries around the world over the next 3 years. So that, for me, is perhaps one of the most important contributions that we're making, trying to contribute to the cognitive diversity, if you like, within the investment profession.
So Canada has picked up on your model.
Yes, it has.
Explain the concept of the model.
Well, the concept of the model is that young women often, for various reasons, don't think about finance as a career. Obviously in the Western world, perhaps they've seen Billions or the Wolf of Wall Street or something like that, and it's bizarrely not something that they necessarily wish to put themselves through. And our challenge as investment professionals is to explain that that really isn't an accurate picture of the way that our world works. And I think the second sort of deeper reason is that we have really failed as an industry to talk about the purpose of what we do. I think too many young women think of it as a very, A, male-dominated, which is true, but B, very selfish profession that's focused solely on enriching the participants within the profession. And what we have done a very poor job of is explaining that actually investment management is quite a noble profession. That without us, particularly in the developing world where it's easier to see, roads don't get built, hospitals don't get built, schools don't get built, people aren't able to plan for retirement. And our profession has done a lousy job, really, of trying to put that forward to young people to attract them into the profession. And as a result, we have a very ethnically undiverse profession, and also a very poorly diverse profession from a background perspective. Everyone tends to have gone to the elite schools in whatever country they're from, tend to be male, tend to be very middle class, and the result of that is that we lack cognitive diversity to help us solve some of the problems that we have in the world and to help us relate better to our clients.
And this seems to be a trend that you're seeing. And how do you mainstream it more then?
Well, that's a great question, and obviously it's a challenge. Well, the first thing we've got to do is to convince the profession that this is a problem. So it's a bit like turkeys voting for Thanksgiving, or whatever. In my country, we would say Christmas. It's a challenge to convince a bunch of middle-aged, middle-class white men, particularly, that that they should try and open things up a little bit more. So that's the first challenge. I think in a wider context, talking about cognitive diversity is not such a problem, but getting into universities and high schools and convincing young women obviously is a huge task. And we're trying to do that, and we're very active in that regard. We have some 500 universities around the world that we work closely with. But it is, that's the battle, and it's not going to be won overnight. It's a generational activity. And it's largely a hearts and minds campaign, and obviously that's going to take a long while.
How are you managing your impact on the environment?
Right. Well, we're really at the start of our journey as far as that's concerned. We're quite good as far as our buildings are concerned. So internally, we are very thoughtful about that. We travel too much. That is and I am unfortunately the worst example of that. So we're trying to figure that out at the moment, and we've done a carbon footprint study of the organization. So we've gone that far, and now we're trying to actually figure out, well, what are we going to do with that information? So we're sort of, I would say, at level 1 on a sort of a 3 to 4 stage process of trying to improve our own internal footprint. And there are lots of things that we've got to think about within that. We have quite a large endowment. How's that managed, and is that being thoughtfully done? But more importantly, again, coming back to what I was saying earlier on, we have this 500,000 group of individuals, and that really, through our curriculum and through continuing professional development activities, trying to get through to that larger audience that they also have a responsibility alongside of ourselves is part of the battle.
You touched on this a little bit in one of your answers just a little bit ago, but I want to ask you again to focus a bit on how does CFA Institute work to create diversity in the investment industry?
Well, it's a country-by-country conversation. So diversity as a specific challenge tends to be more focused on the Western world, so countries like my own in the UK and in the EU and here in America and Canada as well, where we are trying to reach out to minority communities and talk about what we're doing. So we have scholarship programs that are targeted towards some minority communities to try and encourage them into our education. But more importantly, we're just trying to win the battle on saying that a more diverse profession will serve a diverse client base better, and also a more diverse thought process will inevitably result in better investment solutions for a complicated world. There's lots of academic research around that to prove that out. There's lots of academic research around how diverse investment teams will produce better results than non-diverse investment teams. But as I said earlier, it's not something today that the vast majority of investment professionals will agree with. And depressingly, it's not something that the majority of female CFAs agree with either. So that's interesting.
That is interesting. We've seen in the tech industry, for instance, STEM programs starting in high school and even middle schools. How does CFA Institute plan on implementing something like that in the younger ages to get girls and minorities and other groups interested?
Well, we have something called Investment Foundations, which is a junior program, which is very definitely geared. It's free, and it's geared towards high schools and middle schools to help kids sort of get the start in terms of financial education. So that's there. Our challenge is that this isn't in the main, as some states are different in the US, but in the main, it's not part of the curriculum. So the biggest challenge has been talking to school boards about saying that financial literacy, to give it a sort of a more populist term, is something that should really be thought about within the educational curriculum. And that, alas, is not a winning battle at the moment. So most of the activities that we have as an institute are philanthropic, to use a term that you used earlier, where a lot of our groups of CFAs around the nation, which we call CFA societies, and we have about 80 of those in the US in the various cities around the country, they actually have their own initiatives. The challenge with that is that each one, as you kind of said, sort of picks a different piece of this. Some might look at it from a disadvantaged community perspective. Some might look at it middle school issues. Some might look at it as young adults, people who've already left the school system, who are discounting payday checks and things of that nature. And how can we give practical support to families where often no one's had a bank account, for instance, and just on that level, trying to help young people understand the banking system, credit card debt, how to manage their weekly finances is a big effort. But that's kind of philanthropic as opposed to baked in the cake.
Well, it sounds like the spectrum is very broad of what CFA Institute does.
Yes, no, we're you use the term. I hope we're a benign octopus, something with these tentacles everywhere. We're a cuddly octopus, if that's not a contradiction in terms. But yeah, I mean, and we take that. I mean, our mission. The last 6 words in our mission, which I'm passionate about, are for the ultimate benefit of society. And really, that's what we're trying to connect finance and investment management to, is a sense of purpose, is that there is a point to what we do, and the point to what we do is to help everybody in society fulfill their financial aspirations. And again, coming back to something I said earlier, and I get laughed at for saying it, that's actually quite a noble cause, and we should be proud of ourselves, and we should talk more forcefully about it, that we are well motivated and a key part of how society functions.
How does CFA Institute help investment professionals and firms adapt to technological change?
Right. Well, through the curriculum, again, financial technology is a key part of our profession nowadays. And a lot of outside commentators will say that the financial profession is about to have its Uber moment, or however one describes that. And I think to a certain extent it's true, whether it's on asset management techniques or product construction and distribution. Technology is revolutionizing our profession, and for the better, because it is helping us be more transparent, more consistent, and more scalable. So clients will get a hugely improved service as a result of financial technology. It'll be cheaper for them. They'll understand it more. It'll be more accessible, more consistent, and better reported to them. So for me, it's the best thing that's happened to our profession, because it's taking away decades of mumbo jumbo that we have sort of confused the general public with. And that's one of the reasons why I think we have this challenge of connecting to purpose, because we've overcomplicated what is a very simple business.
We're talking, of course, in honor of Global Ethics Day.
Yes.
I want you to tell me about the role of ethics as being core to professionalizing the investment industry.
Well, ethics, firstly, is at the core of everything that we teach. So 10% of our program is based on ethical teaching, which is based on something that we call our code of conduct. So every charter holder, everyone who's got the 3 letters after their name, CFA, has to annually sign an attestation that they have lived their professional life in accordance with our code of conduct at all times during the previous 12 months. So that's a great statement as far as the public is concerned, that a charter holder is ethically committed. What does that mean? Well, in essence, ethics is putting yourself in your client's shoes. It's no more complicated than that. If you're dealing with me as a financial professional, your job as a financial professional is to say, if I were the other side of the table, would I be happy with the way that I'm being dealt with? Nothing more than that. And when you think about what a professional is, I always like to torture the medical profession as far as that as my analogy. And I know people can beat up on doctors a lot, but basically when you sit in front of a doctor, you believe that she or he is advising you in your best interests. And that's what we have to establish in the minds of our clients when they're sitting in front of their financial advisor. And today, alas, I think most people sitting in front of their financial advisor will sort of say, well, because it'll invariably be a male, what's his angle, really? And until we can get over that barrier and make our clients feel that we are really looking at things from their perspective, then we can't really truly call ourselves either a profession or an ethical profession either. And so that's the essence of it. Put yourself in your client's shoes and do as you would be done by.
How has the investment world evolved throughout your career? What changes have you seen?
Well, that's a long question. I'm very old, so it goes back into the early 1980s. And so when I started out, and I think when I think back to the early 1980s, the first one I would say is that the composition of the industry in terms of its educational background has changed hugely. I did modern history at university, didn't do a finance degree. It was only when I came down from university I went and became an accountant and then into asset management. And I would say people of my vintage, who are obviously well into their 50s, anyone over the age of 50 to 60% of them had a liberal arts background. When Big Bang happened in the City of London and its attendant sort of events here in the US, around the sort of late 80s to early 90s, the industry changed into being a very technically driven one. Computerized trading, screen-based investment management, all of those things. And so we went to kids who really were educated in business and finance and econ degrees. And anyone under the age of 50, I would say 90% of them have that background. So the challenge has been that we have driven this industry down an ever narrower pipe, in my view, in terms of its human content, as it were. It's a rather inelegant expression, but I hope you know what I mean. And I think the change that we're now coming into under financial technology is that we're going to have to broaden it back out again. Because if you think about the challenges that fintech will bring us, how do we take this very technical content and explain it to people? And that's going to be more something that people who've got softer skills are going to be able to do. So that's one element to it. And I think that technical focus has also divorced us from our clients a little bit. It's compounded this this challenge that we have of being unable to explain what we do to people in simple terms, because people who have a very technical background are not necessarily the best communicators in the world. It's obviously an awful generalization, but I think it has some force.
It definitely has merit, for sure. So what you're saying is that it can't be a one-size-fits-all type of training.
Definitely not. And I think the world, as we all know, is getting more complicated, not less. And everybody's looking for this unicorn, really, which is someone who's a data scientist, a quantitative mathematician, who can also talk to people. And that's gonna be a struggle and a stretch.
Is CFA Institute using behavioral finance and other tools to prepare people for retirement and how to live on a fixed income?
Well, our job is not necessarily to educate the end investor, it's to educate the professional. But yes, indirectly. I mean, behavioral finance is a key tool and something that is ever more present in our curriculum and in the thinking of financial advisors everywhere. How do we help nudge people effectively towards the behaviors that are best suited to their personal circumstances? So yes, behavioral economics is a key piece of it, and something that's been very exciting over the last 10 years to see how that has really become part of the mainstream. But retirement, I think, is fascinating. You're too young, but my children are about to have. I'm about to be a grandfather at some point in the next 3 or 4 years, which I'm very excited about. And you think about that, and my grandkids are going to live to 110 on average, God willing. And you think about retirement in that sense, and it becomes a very sort of complicated conversation. You're certainly not going to be retiring at 60 and having 50 years being paid for by the state or by your own savings. So the whole concept of retirement scheme planning, I think, has to be rethought in the context of a world in which people are going to live such very, very long lives. And that I don't think society has started to grapple with, really, is reimagining what life is going to be like for a generation of people who are going to live into their hundreds.
That's frightening.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a world that you necessarily feel that you want to live in yourself, but it is one that's coming. And I think, so the retirement scheme crisis for me divides into two parts. One is the short-term one that, as we all know, particularly in the United States, that most of our retirement schemes are are bankrupt. And that's a result of a lack of political will, and often at state level, politicians playing fast and loose with funding rates as far as state pension plans are concerned. But that's been talked about endlessly, and there's not much that we can add there. What we're trying to do is to say, well, part of it is training, and that we can do something about. So how can we act on pension fund trustee training? And we've got some programs that are geared towards that we're trying to focus on. But then there's the second question, which is, well, what is life going to look like in 60 or 70 years' time? And my kids are all in their 20s and 30s. My youngest son is 26, and you go to a 26-year-old and you say, in a zero interest rate environment, son, you've got to save 20% of your salary for your retirement. And which, by the way, your retirement is at age 75. It's not at any time soon. And they look at you and they say, well, thanks, Dad, but that's really the most useless advice I think I've ever received. Firstly, I spend every penny of my salary, so there's no way I can save 20%. And, I look at 75-year-olds and they're not having much fun, frankly. So why am I saving for that? I'd rather spend the money now, go on holiday and have fun while I can. And when you look at it that way, you can't argue with that. That's a perfectly sensible, rational, actually, set of decisions. And, our retirement scheme system is predicated upon behaviors that the millennial generation simply does not have. So it's not a recipe for success.
What is the greatest ethical challenge facing CFA Institute and the investment profession in general?
I think the one that it's always been, that our profession deals with money, and there's an awful lot of it in the profession. And we also have this challenge that there's this huge, what we call in our jargon, asymmetry of information, that as an investment professional, you know far more than your client does, because financial literacy levels in general, it's a subject that turns people off. They're not really focused. It's not like your health, for instance. When something goes wrong with your health, you're absolutely focused on it. You're on the internet. You're worried. You're trying to figure out what to do. Your wealth is something that people just sort of push away from them all the time. So professionals have this huge advantage over their clients. And so that's the biggest ethical challenge, that there's money involved, a lot of money involved, and your client isn't engaged. And so your scope for misusing that advantage is enormous.
That's also not very ethical.
No, obviously, and so that's where ethics come in, which is put yourself in your client's shoes, and are you offering them product that is appropriate for them? Is it properly priced? Are you continually advise them throughout the relationship that you have with them? Do they understand? Have you worked hard enough to really get inside their head and figure out what it is that they want from their wealth? Those are the challenges that a professional needs to rise to, always with at the back of their mind the understanding that you have this opportunity for abusing that position, because your client often isn't really engaged in that conversation in the way that would protect them from the unscrupulous.
Is it a combination of a lack of interest or a lack of understanding?
Well, I think it's both of those things, and I always say again, sorry, forgive me for torturing doctors, that I think when you go to a doctor, you're going for a problem that by and large she or he is going to cure within 3 to 6 months. So they've got a very immediate value proposition as far as you're concerned, and you can tell whether a doctor is or isn't up to their task. With a financial professional, I might be advising someone who's, say, 30 years of age on their wealth that they are, their retirement planning for 30 years hence or 40 years hence. And so my value proposition is hugely extended. And so as a result of that, people are able to have almost a sort of a do-it-yourself culture that, well, is that financial advisor really adding value to me? I can't see it in the here and now. I may as well do it myself. And so we have that challenge. And so there's a greater responsibility to explain it better. And that's where I think we are so hopeless, that we just are not connecting with our clients around how important it is that they get proper advice for their wealth. Because, you need two things to live a happy life. You can be as healthy as you like, but if you're as poor as a church mouse, then it's unlikely that you're going to be as happy as you could be.